Meeting all. And thanks in advance, Maggie, by the way, and Bobby for your
Yeah,
time.
no problem.
Right, here we go. Okay. Good morning, Natalia. Morning, Andre. Morning, William. Morning, Adam. Morning, Chris. Morning, Vanessa. Great to see you. Morning, Lawrence. Morning, Charles. Hi, Christos. Hi, Pelwinder. Thanks for joining. If you've just joined, the usual fashion is to ask if you could mute, please, just to reduce background noise. Hi, Peter. Thanks for joining. Hi, Richard. Thanks for joining. And Shani's. I don't know if it's Shani or Shani, but there we go. Shani will tell me.
Shani.
Shani, there we go. Shani. It's got a hidden R in it somewhere, but there we are. Thanks for that. Great. Okay. And hi, Adam. Thanks for joining. And Paul, good to see you as well. Right. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Welcome to this week's Coffee Morning. We're delighted to have Maggie Rodger from the Association of Member-Nominated Trustees, with her glamorous assistant, Bobby Riddaway, who I'm going to pass you to, who's going to sort of do a brief introduction to today's session. And Bobby, I think, is going to run some slides. As usual, we are a very lovely bunch. And if you would like to interact with Maggie or Robbie, just raise a hand and we'll bring you in to ask any questions as we go. We also would love you to put any questions or any links in the chat so that everybody can see any pertinent points are available, or any links are in the chat as well. And we are actually recording. So can we have a thumbs up, Vanessa, William, Christos, everybody, that we're being recorded? That's fine. And without any further ado, I'll monitor the lobby. And I'll now pass you to Bobby, who will introduce the session. And I hope you enjoy it. And thank you to Maggie and Bobby in advance. Bobby?
Thank you, Steve. Welcome, everybody. It's nice to be talking about these small, medium schemes for change. And hopefully with the questions, we'll get some. So we'll see some of the details about these schemes and why they're so unique and why they shouldn't just put into a big box and just labelled as go and consolidate. So I'm delighted that Maggie's agreed to join me on this talk. Maggie's co-chair of the Association of Member-Nominated Trustees and spent many years working on trustees, including the Church of England board. And I'll let Maggie say a little bit more about her experience. But the way this session is going to run, Maggie's put forward an excellent presentation on what help small schemes can do with, and I'll let her present that. Then I've got some slides I prepared, which I might use to reply, or I might do a verbal reply, depending on how it goes, how many questions we get. I'm hoping this session is very interactive and gives you a lot of flavour as and what we mean by small and medium-sized schemes, and you go away thinking, oh, I didn't realise schemes were so diverse like that at that level. So I'll hand over to Maggie now, and I'll bring the slides up when you're ready, Maggie.
Okay, do you want to, let's start. I think an awful lot of what I've got to say feels like the blindingly obvious and the just common sense, but then I think largely that's what you want your member trustees to do. So if I can go to the first slide, Bobby, that's it. There we are. What I think there is a problem is that the world says all pension schemes have all got awfully complicated and all the rest of it. And member trustees think, oh, perhaps I can't do this. Perhaps I need help. Perhaps it's not available. And I'm just here saying, well, actually, mostly you can. There is lots of help. Sometimes people just feel they need more knowledge. The world has got too complicated. But there is masses of free training out there from the industry. I'll plug AMNT. We have a website, we run conferences and everything else. I'm very happy to bring in any member trustees. PMI, you can join as a board, which is much cheaper than joining as individuals, and there's all their training available. Lay trustees tend to, well, the industry tends to use the phrase lay trustees with an overtone of amateur, but actually they're not. They're just not being paid for their job as a professional trustee, and they can be qualified, and many are, to exactly the same standard as professional trustees. accreditation training through PMI or other bodies is open to them and exactly the same standard. The only thing that we find is that schemes, it is not appropriate for member trustees who aren't being paid to be expected to pay for their own training. But as long as schemes or the employer pays for this, there is plenty of training available. And the other thing is just networking. Talking to other trustees helps you understand your own scheme better, how it fits within the industry. It's good fun and it's supportive, and you realise that actually you're not alone. You're doing the same as everybody else, and perhaps you do know more than some other people. So again, we've got AMNT events which put you in contact with other people. So if you just think, I don't know enough, there are plenty of ways of remedying that. And that's a simple thing for member trustees to do. Next slide, please, Bobby. I like this bit. Sometimes you get a knowledge gap about a particular issue. Something crops up that you haven't come across before. It might be something new that the regulators put out. It might be something that's a new situation for your scheme. Really, you should be doing training as a board on something new coming up for your scheme. And the only thing is, if you're a small scheme, you need to make sure that you have the confidence to tell your advisors this is what you want them to do. And perhaps you should be saying, well, we need an update on what's going on in the industry every so often anyway. What else has the regulator been saying? What should we be doing? Where is the world going? TPR has got lots of guidance documents on new issues and challenges, which can be really helpful. And I can see Vanessa in there, and I'm just sort of going, yeah, they are very helpful. It's really good. And you've got the other industry training we talked about. And just to set it in context, everybody says that the world of pensions is getting more complicated, but that doesn't mean lay trustees can't cope with it. Professional trustees have to cope with each new thing that comes along as well and learn about it. So it just means that everybody has to up their game and keep in touch with what's going on and keep reading, keep learning. And next. So then, if having done all of that and thought about all the ways you could get more information, you decide that actually it isn't information that's your problem. It's confidence and support in how you do things, then this is perhaps you're about to enter your end game, or you feel that you really want to sort of think about new things that you haven't been doing before. And so this might be when you want to think about bringing a professional trustee alongside you on the board. They're there to put extra knowledge and experience onto the board to give you insights that perhaps they bring from other places. But you have to consider carefully what you want them to do for you. You might be looking just for an individual with a particular skill, and there are plenty of ways to go around finding them. You may be looking for a professional trustee from a professional trustee firm. Plug TPR again. There's some brilliant guidance in how to appoint professional trustees with a link there I've put, but hopefully that link could be in circulation afterwards. You need to find somebody that fits your scheme. Are the applicants willing to work alongside the existing board of advisors? Are they actually trying to bring bundled advisors or their own support teams on board with your scheme? Is that what you want? There is a certain bit of the market that is clearly business focused and actually almost clearly sends their first trustees out with the view that actually after a few years we can probably convert them to a sole trusteeship. If that's what you want, have a look at what has happened with other of their clients. Check whether they really do want to just work alongside you or not. Do the people that you see engage with your scheme, or do you think they're just coming with a house view? Which is, when the smaller you are, the more likely you are to get someone sent who may not have as much experience. But that's not what I think of Bobby. But there are, in general, you need to be careful who's coming in. And then basic checks, check the accreditation, check the conflicts. Are they willing to challenge the sponsor? We don't want a cosy relationship between the trustee and the sponsor. Will the actual trustees have enough time for you? What happens in a crisis? If they've got 15 schemes, where are you in the queue on the day that everything goes wrong? And are they a good fit personally? Do you just get on with them? Do you feel they'll be giving you as a board, as a group, a constructive challenge and some thought diversity, but not just expecting you to go, well, yes, you're the expert, you know best. And just make sure that you've sorted out how often you review them and review the appointment in the same way as you would with any other advisor. And then a final slide, I think. Just the point at which you realise that you can't find member trustees, you've got a closed scheme, everybody is not just retired, but been retired 10 or 15 years and really has no intention of actually picking up some trusteeship work, then this is when sole trusteeship comes into its own, because there isn't the possibility of running the scheme. And like a merger, you're doing the right thing for the members, and therefore this is the next step. But you do have to work out how you're going to do it. AMNT is conscious that there are people out there, actually functioning trustee boards, that have been discovered overnight that they no longer exist and that there is a sole trustee in place because the employer and the sole trustee firm have found this, decided this saves money and is convenient for everybody. What it does for the members isn't quite the same. So it's really important that you think about how you manage knowledge in the transition from an existing board to a new sole trusteeship. Who's actually got the scheme history and the knowledge of the sponsor, all that bit that sits inside people's heads and isn't necessarily written down, or even where it's written down. Will your sole trustee work alongside a consultative group of members, or the outgoing board sometimes sits as an extra consultative group to help do transition, and it helps member engagement. I've heard of schemes where the members refuse to reply to the sole trustee board because they think it's a scam, because they don't know what's going on. So you need to make sure members are fully engaged with what's happening and understand what's going on with it. And then, of course, obviously, will your sole trustees, bring in the right skills, diversity of experience? You don't want pensions industry groupthink here. If the sole trustees are managing lots and lots of schemes, if you're a small scheme, how much attention will you get? Will they be willing to challenge the sponsor, or is this an easy option for the sponsor as they come to work out how they buy out, how much quality they pay for buying out, whether they're prepared to share circuses with members, and all those sorts of difficult questions where a good balance with the sponsor is essential. So that's when the only cases where I think sole trusteeship works. But alongside Bobby, who's offering co-trusteeship, which is a great idea, I think you need to be careful not to be dragged into bringing in a professional trustee because you don't think you're good enough. There are plenty of ways of making sure you can do it on your own. So I'll let Bobby take over from there.
Thank you, Maggie. Doesn't seem to be a load of questions at this point, so it's probably worth me doing my response, then using plenty of time for questions and for discussion. So I'll just bring up my slides.
Oh, we got a question in the chat from Podrake. Do you
Okay,
want to have a look at that one?
go ahead. You want to ask the question, Padraig?
Sorry, Bobby, I couldn't press
Oh,
the
sorry, yeah,
button quick
I've
enough.
just picked it up. Yeah, yes, there are huge conflicts of interest, and bundled service is a huge one. On the other hand, I'm also conscious that there's a lot of hidden conflicts of interest where it isn't bundled services. It's we'll bring in these advisors because we work with them, and funnily enough, those advisors bring in these sole trustees when they're in another scheme. So there's a lot of hidden conflicts. You just have to ask lots of questions and work out what it is you want. Bundled can work if it's cheaper and efficient, but you do have to ask, well, would the trustee bit sue the others if they didn't think they'd done a good job and done it wrong?
Rosalind, do you have a question?
Yeah, thanks very much. I thought that was really interesting, and obviously looking to be excited by Bobby's bit as well. But question I have, sort of with my lawyer's hat on, is you've made a lot of really good points there, Maggie, particularly about keeping members informed and making sure that people are comfortable with the changes that are made, either if you move to sole trustee or you get a professional in, and about what the other trustees are looking to do there. I'd be really interested in understanding how, as trustees, you deal with the fact that in the end, legally, if the company, I mean, it's slightly different moving to a sole trusteeship, but if the company is saying, well, this is the trustee I want, usually they have the power of appointment and you're kind of stuck with it. How, as a board of trustees, do you do your best to make sure that your voice is heard when that kind of conversation is going on, rather than the company just saying, well, it's my decision, ha ha ha?
Yeah, I mean, that's difficult. And the only thing you can do is talk about, well, if the company wants to appoint, are you going to sort of write up a sort of job spec for yourselves as to what the gaps are, what the skills are, what the knowledge and experience basis is. If you can't necessarily get down to choosing who it is, you can at least try and say this is what you're trying to cover. That's the hard bit with a small company with a sponsor that doesn't sit easily with the trustees.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
I think the other point, Rosalind, is giving them the option that there is an option to sole trusteeship for these schemes. So that's probably a good intro for me to do my part of the presentation.
Yeah, go on. Yes.
So I'll open it up now. Wrong one. Our presentation looked very similar when you do the sharing function. So here we go. Okay, so I think for a while now, sole trustee has been seen as probably the preferred approach for small to medium schemes who want a professional trustee for cost and efficiency reasons, almost the same way that for a while buyout has been the gilt edged option for schemes wanting to go to endgame. So I'm basically going to explode some of the myths around this and say why it isn't necessarily a done deal that you go to co-trustee and why sole trustee, sorry, and that why it isn't necessarily really expensive to go to co-trustee. Just covering some of the context Maggie's already covered. So there's definitely a challenge with increased legislation for small schemes and technical complexities. And I totally agree with what Maggie said about getting trustee boards trained up. But I'm firmly of the view that a trustee board is what you assess as whether it's competent to do the job. And I think there's a limit to how much you want every single trustee on the board to be fully trained up to be able to do the job of a professional trustee or a sole trustee. I think different skills and different knowledge levels within different members of a trustee board are highly valuable. And I think in UK corporate land, it's only trusteeship of pension schemes where we seem to think that's not that might not be the way down, because even company boards are introducing less professional people into their boards, or less knowledgeable people on the company onto their boards to increase diversity of thought. And I'm talking real diversity of thought here. So traditionally for the smaller schemes, you either carry on as you do with your late trustees, or you go to professional trustee, and increasingly that's sole trustee. But if you have a co-trustee on, that can just give you that extra boost of technical ability, boost of risk awareness, boost of somebody who's basically spent all their career on pension schemes to just increase that general level of knowledge on the board. And that can help either with a run-on, or even with if you're going down to an end game approach, which I'll cover in a bit. So there's nothing extra here. I've already covered this, and Maggie's covered some of that. So let's just go on to understand what this looks like. So for a small scheme, to appoint a co-trustee, you really need a co-trustee who's really experienced and risk managed, because otherwise you're just going to get somebody on board who's having to learn as much as everybody else, and that's where it can become quite expensive. For small schemes, getting an experienced trustee on really allows that trustee to understand the risks that the scheme's running, put them into context, and the regulator talks quite a lot about the rules being principles, and an experienced trustee can help you put those principles into place. A corporate trustee, on the other hand, corporate sole trustee, is where you're effectively saying, as Maggie said, you haven't really got the expertise and you haven't got the people to be able to run the scheme. So then you want to go to a sole trustee who knows all about scheme, can take all the governance on, and can work with the advisors. Increasingly, what you're seeing, and this is so good for some schemes and not so good for other schemes, is when you go to the sole trustee model, you're getting quite far down the bundled approach, whereas in the past, sole trustee might have been a cheap option to run the scheme, because you're not having to have 4 or 5 people that work in the company in the board meeting, and you're appointing an individual who can then work with all the advisors and liaise and then cut down on time, cut down on meeting cost, cut down on the types of reports being produced. Increasingly, a lot of the sole trustee models are taking on a lot of that consulting alongside, and not cutting down on that. And I think I would challenge now that sole trustee is a cheap model. I don't think sole trustee even sells itself as a cheap model anymore. Quite a lot of the sole trustees bundle quite a lot of the services together to say this is a high governance, very effective way to get to an end game, rather than this is a cheaper alternative to how you have currently doing it. But I think originally sole trustee did come out as a cheaper alternative to what you are currently doing. So the advantage of appointing a co-trustee and a sole trustee, it can't be underplayed. I mean, I've used the word lay trustees here. I know Maggie doesn't like the word lay trustees, but member nominated or employee nominated trustees generally have the history of the scheme. For small schemes, they can have documents stored for years past that solve legal issues. I heard an example last week of a scheme that had avoided a big legal bill because one of the trustees on the board actually had in his garage the resolution, the announcement that was made by the trustees 30 years ago. I mean, why he still had it in his garage after 30 years, I don't know, but that happened. I've had recently on one of my cases where we're trying to find a member, and the consulting firm can't find the member, and then we've had another firm try and find the member. It actually turns out, once we got a bit more information, that one of the trustees knew somebody who knew the member. And that happens quite a lot in the small schemes. There's quite a lot of extra benefits that when you come to things like either run on or buyout, when you need to get really detailed on the data you've got, they can get there's quite a lot of options there that don't exist by just doing a legal troll of your data and of your documentation. Professional expertise on a small board, professional trustee expertise can, if it's experience, can bring real benefits in terms of checking that you're being efficient over the whole process, checking with you're using your advisors appropriately. And I'm not talking here about going in and reducing your advisors' fees. I must use your advisors for the jobs that they're doing. Quite often, the smaller schemes will have more junior consultants, and good experienced trustees can supplement their expertise and work alongside those consultants, and in some cases help mentor those consultants if they're quite junior, plugging sort of an expertise gap, stroke governance gap in a smaller scheme. What you need though is you need an experienced trustee, and generally experienced trustees are big firms tend to be very expensive. So there are a few firms like ourselves who don't have all these overheads, and you can get an experienced trustee who isn't going to cost the earth, and who will actually come in and help you look at your scheme to see if it's even appropriate to have a trustee on the scheme. The other thing about having a co-trustee on the scheme, which is a massive benefit to the existing trustees, which even if they're wavering about whether they want to continue or not, is actually putting somebody onto the scheme with skin in the game, with the same fiduciary responsibility. So if they, knowing all the risks that the scheme runs, if they know all the issues the scheme's got, if they can then sleep at night, then that gives the other trustees the confidence that they can as well. I just read this morning another article, nothing to do with pensions, about trust. The best people to work with, you trust them. I think if you get trust with an experienced pension professional, 30-40 years in the industry, comes on, helps you then run your scheme better, then that just gives more confidence to the existing trustees on the scheme, and allows them to feel confident to run on. And if you're not introducing loads of additional cost, then it can be an efficient way of running a good scheme. There's a lot of really good schemes out there, which you would class as small, who have got very effective trustee boards, and they don't have to be large either. The scheme I'm chair of is a lawyer scheme based in London. It's a partnership, and we've had 3 trustees. We have a very experienced member trustee, a very experienced partner in the business, and myself as the professional trustee. And if you look at our trustee body, if you look at the way we operate like a trustee body. We don't operate like a professional trustee with 2 lay trustees. We operate as a joint, as a team of 3. And I think it's really important for small and medium-sized schemes that they have a proportionate approach to how they adopt things. I mean, the way legislation's gone recently, the way the requirements for schemes, there's almost an acceptance that it's so complicated. We have to give this away. We have to give it to a sole trustee who can run the scheme and not look after it ourselves. It's not going to be efficient for us. The option of not doing that is that basically you need to be able to manage the regulation, manage your scheme, manage the main issues, and proportionally manage them, and give it what I call a risk managed approach to the scheme, not a risk zero approach to the scheme. And in any business, if you go to a risk zero approach, it costs a fortune, and it isn't really effective. It destroys businesses. If you have a risk managed approach, you take the risks where you can afford them, and you manage the risks where you can't take them down to zero, and then you come up with a solution which actually delivers a healthy company. It's the same with pension schemes. If you manage the regulations and don't tick all the boxes just because they're there, then you're going to provide a much more effective way of managing these schemes to either run on or to end game. I mean, I keep hearing figures about the size of scheme below which it's not appropriate to run on, the size of which scheme it's not appropriate to consider surplus. I struggle to see how you can say that about an individual scheme unless you actually see the circumstances of those schemes. And I've worked on schemes up below 500 million for most of my career. And one thing I can tell you is that they are completely different. You can have a scheme of 7 million, like I'm currently working on, which is governed like a scheme of 150 million. You can have a scheme of 300 million, which has got a massive corporate who doesn't put much resource into that scheme at all, and there's a scheme that is very appropriate to go down the sole trustee route. It really depends on the actual scheme, the corporate it has, and the circumstances of the scheme. You can't just blindly say schemes of this size need to go down this route. So, in summary, corporate sole trustee does what it says. It offers you a streamlined but highly governance approach, and I think increasingly a sole trustee model will generally give you a high level of governance, close to zero risks, but at a reasonable cost. They're not cheap anymore. And sometimes, and I've heard stories of this, sometimes if you're not careful, if you go from a collaborative relationship between the trustee board and the sponsor, you can introduce sole trustees who then introduce friction between the two because they're over aware of the conflicts that could exist. And I have heard of employers who've appointed sole trustees and all of a sudden realised actually we didn't expect these issues to come out. Now, if you up the level of governance, then there may be other issues that you do have to cover with the sponsor, but you don't necessarily have to introduce friction where there wasn't friction in the meantime. Co-trustees, as long as you get an experienced individual who doesn't cost the earth, then co-trustee models can be very efficient for small schemes. And there's plenty of firms, not just ours, who will give you an experienced trustee, but don't have the support models back at the base where they have to charge big consulting type fees. So you really need to assess where your scheme is. Don't just throw the towel in because you think you can't cope. And quite often, to get a view on as to what's appropriate for you, then maybe your consultant isn't the best person to ask what models you should approach. If you get a good experienced person with no conflicts, who can come in and just give you an overview of your scheme's governance and say, actually, these are the models that could work for you, then they quite often, there's not just me who will do that for free and just go in and have a discussion with you as to what's appropriate. Because I don't like seeing schemes being forced into routes, whether that's governance or whether that's their whole trustee approach. So hopefully might have generated some questions there, or a bit of discussion. So
yeah, I can see a question. Thanks. In the about lay trustees and time off for training, and there's an answer. There was an answer. Yes, you have the legal right to the time for attending meetings. It doesn't actually give you a legal right for time for training or for time for preparing for meetings. We have talked about this fairly volubly with DWP and ministers. There is also a nasty little wrinkle in the process that got exposed a few years ago. A lady whose job was casework, I think some sort of auditing, complained about her job and all the rest of it, and ended up in a tribunal with her employer, where it was deemed that she had the right to the time off to go to the committee meetings for the pension scheme, but she didn't have the right to have her workload reduced to match that time off. So she must complete the rest of the work in her own time. Now, that is not a way to recruit lay trustees. And that is still, as I understand it, the legal position. And funnily enough, we have said an awful lot about that in the consultation last year, that needs to be sorted out. But what we have suggested is that it might be better if the schemes were responsible for a lot of these issues where it's possible to divorce them from the employer, such as the cost of training and all these sorts of things, rather than the employer do it. And the same thing applies to appointing trustees. If the scheme was in control rather than the sponsor, it would deal with some of these conflict issues. The other thing that I heard in that, talking, Bobby, about sole trusteeship, I think I actually received a circular advert online a few years back. It was a fiduciary management company who thought I was a finance director still, and who was busy telling me that I should go with them, who would convert the scheme to sole trusteeship, because as a financial manager, I would have much more control over the money and could take all the profits. That didn't strike me as a good reason for sole trusteeship, but it was one that was being published out there. And I think it's made a lot of employers move in that direction, even when they had perfectly good functioning schemes. So our recommendation to the government was that move to sole trusteeship should be with the agreement of the existing trustee board or a consultation of the members. There's huge amounts of things you can't do without consulting your members, but removing their voice from governments ought to be one of the things you can't do without asking.
Yeah, we got a question from William. I'd just say, though, we're not saying here sole trusteeship is bad. It's a bit like fiduciary management. When that first came in, almost every consulting firm that had fiduciary management was saying fiduciary management is more efficient than normal investment consulting, and the CMA got wind of that eventually. And now fiduciary management is about 20-30% of pension schemes. Sole trusteeship has a level of 4 pensions, which is just seen as the only option. William?
Yeah, and I think sole trusteeship is fine where it's agreed it's the right option for the scheme. It's not there because it's the right option for the employer. The whole point of trustee boards is to balance the rights of the various parties.
Yeah, picking up on Maggie's point there, I think with the rise of discretion, I think the relevance of understanding the history of the scheme and who said what and what was expected is a factor which should be included. It's almost like it seems to me that member nominated trustees in particular can focus in on discretion as a coming topic. The authorized payment rules which come in next year make it really attractive, and I think suddenly the total impetus, one direction, simplify things, cost reduction, go to maybe sole trustees, maybe no. The need to understand what's happened and why suddenly increases because it's the next chapter. And I think the role of the trustees, not just being a purely technical playing against the investment consultants or this. No. This is about real money going to real people, and the people who understand why things are the way they are suddenly becomes the point. So I think it's an exciting time for member nominated trustees. But so maybe things like authorized payments should almost, like going back to your point, maybe about skills and training, don't try and know everything, but do be bloody good on precedents, what could be done, the modelling, all that lend themselves to, can you pay more to members while protecting on the downside?
Okay.
I think also, William, it's quite often you're changing relationships, like especially now that more endgame is including deferred as well, and you're basically changing the overall relationship with those members, and it's really good to have members on board while you go through that process of communicating to members.
Yeah, communications is definitely going to be upped as an important feature. You can see that coming through in the rules around surpluses and all this sort of stuff. So I think suddenly you're going to need, people are going to be reading, members are going to be reading stuff, wanting to know that the trustees do appreciate the past and can use it for the future.
Yeah, and when you've only got 5 members, it's the communication's even more important.
Yes, yeah.
Chris?
Cheers. Yeah, great presentation. Thank you guys. I've worked with some really pragmatic sole trustees, but I also love when I talk to lay trustees and we're talking about individual members and they say, oh yeah, Brenda, yeah, well, how's she getting on and stuff like that, and that personal touch is great. My question was, there's a lot of our small schemes now are really well funded and are going through a buy-in, maybe to buy out, wind up approach. I was just wondering, are there any stats on the difference in how that surplus is being used by schemes with sole trustees or with lay trustees, and whether sort of member enhancements are more prevalent under one route or the other?
Really fascinating. Instead of obsessing about size, if we talked about different governance styles and looked at what that did for us.
Yeah. I don't think there are any stats, but I certainly know anecdotally listen to people around the industry, because I'm doing a lot of talking to different firms around the industry. There is still a big group of professionals and trustees who think buyout is the gilt-edged thing, and well, now when you're below 50 million, you haven't really got the money to do anything else. And again, that comes back to really that where we're at. Are we really saying that once you're a certain size, you can't have a proper discussion on discretions? You can't have a proper discussion on whether giving all your money to insurer is the right approach. I picked up a £50,000 scheme because the sole trustee was the employer who couldn't do anything with the scheme. Only because we got the scheme can we sort it out. You shouldn't be. I hate to see small schemes where someone says there's no way of doing that, not doing it.
Yeah. And just the other thing though, even if buyout is where you're going to go, I think member trustees are a lot more interested in exactly who you buy out with, what the service quality is like, and all these sorts of things. They're looking at what the member's experience afterwards is going to be, and not just the price, assuming that you have the capability to manage some of those differences. And it's not just how much surplus you can generate.
Cool.
Yeah. No, sorry, Chris. No stats, but I think the conversation should still be had for small schemes. Rosalind?
Sorry,
go on,
just
Chris.
I was just going to say, I think my question was a bit more about how any surplus is being used, and whether either of those governance structures was more predisposed to sending the money to member enhancements or sending the money back to the company, or that it may be too small of maybe that there's not that many of them to look around, but just whether anecdotally.
I don't think there are any stats, but I looking at the sole trustee model, like some of the less pragmatic sole trustee models, I think it's the history is a lot of sponsor influence on appointing sole trustees. So anecdotally, that might say there's more of a discussion there. But I'd be horrified to see sole trustees marketing themselves now as the way to get the most surplus out for the employer.
Yeah, and I think the trouble is it's what the employer thinks might happen. I've got a colleague who was busy discussing how they might use surplus as they came towards an end game, and the employer didn't like the proportions they were discussing and was busy talking about whether they should go to sole trusteeship instead. And that's the bit of the market where they think the employer is going to have a better go at what they do if the member trustees aren't very compliant.
Rosalind?
Hi, yeah. It was just very briefly that the point about your legal rights to time off, etc. Absolutely agree what the regulations say, and I think you must be right, Maggie. It must put people off standing because the regulations only cover the trustee meetings. what I would say, and I wouldn't expect an employment tribunal to look at this either, but what I would say is if anyone finds themselves in that situation where they really seem to have an employer who's not being helpful for the fact that they need training and the fact that they actually need to be doing less work because they're doing this thing, I think there are very strong legal arguments around the trust duties of the employer as basically the settlor of the trust, that they had a duty if they are appointing someone to effectively enable them to do the job properly. So what I'd say is that if a trustee is hitting that problem, speak to the scheme lawyers because they might have a couple of good arguments that could force the employer's hand.
Okay, I'm fascinated because it was lost at tribunal, but perhaps they didn't have the right advice then. Yes.
Well, a tribunal is going to look at employment law. It's not going to look at trust law.
Yeah. Okay.
It really isn't going to be there. So I think it's worth seeing if there's a line to run, because I think even just a couple of stern words might get an employer to back down on that if the trustees' lawyers say that.
I'd love to talk to you more about that when we be in touch. Yeah.
Yeah, please do drop me a line.
Yeah.
John?
Hi, good morning. Thank you both of you. Just a couple of quick thoughts. I mean, we've certainly seen over many years the thought process that who would be a trustee because of decisions, and in the past there have been some decisions they've had to make. But going forward with a scheme that's running on, independent of its size, this challenge of surplus and refunds on a low dependency basis, which isn't defined anywhere, and then the split between member and sponsor and the shape of both the payments to members and to sponsor, there's a lot of decisions going to be made, and that puts a lot of onus and a lot of responsibility on lay trustees who have never been in that space. Well, I'm not a flag waver for sole trustees or independent trustees, but I genuinely struggle to see many people putting their hands up to say I want to take on that responsibility.
Yeah, and it does really bring it back to the decisions that actually make a difference to members' benefits. So I think it goes back to the scheme. I mean, one option is a sole trustee with very clear frameworks. Another option is an experienced trustee. I think what isn't really an option is a junior trustee, a junior professional trustee on a scheme like that, because they are not going to have had those conversations in the past. You really need well-rounded trustee so you need an experienced pensions professional to have those conversations with employers. And the other option. So just one more point, John.
Okay.
Yeah, just one more point which I haven't mentioned, in case I forget to mention it. I would always say in this presentation, not only is a good co-trustee an option for small schemes, a good lawyer is an option for a good experienced, reasonably cost pragmatic lawyer it goes alongside on all the really small schemes I've been appointed to. I've got alongside me a good pragmatic, reasonably cost lawyer, and they're invaluable in these situations. And there's a feeling in the industry that, again, if you're below a certain size, you can't have a lawyer who looks at your scheme all the time. You might be able to bring them in on the odd project. No, you can. Small schemes can appoint lawyers to come alongside them and and work with them.
I agree, Bobby. I think there's some decisions though that people they're going to face, and they've never had to make these decisions before. I'll give you one simple example, and it's actually not that simple, to be fair. But if trustees decide, for example, to increase the pension for life to individuals, and those individuals are means tested, there's a pound for pound disregard from their means tested benefits. So the trustees think they've done a good thing by giving them a pension increase, but the effect on the individual is a net zero.
Yeah. If
they pay a lump sum, that lump sum isn't, not all of it is necessarily disregarded on a means tested basis. That makes these decisions really complex. Yeah. And I'm just not sure genuinely whether lay trustees can get their arms and heads around these things. That's the point. I think we've got a lot of decisions coming forward, going into the future, which are a lot more complex than we've seen in the past.
Yeah.
But I think the thing though is that what's the role of the trustee and what's the role of finding the right advisors? Because it's not for trustees to understand exactly how the benefit system works and all the rest of it. It's are your advisors bringing the right information to you? And the role of the trustee is to be out there getting the advisors and challenging what they're saying. And yes, it's good to hear that that's a sort of issue you need to keep your head around, but it shouldn't be the trustees that are required to make those calculations. So it is a problem if you're a small scheme and you can't find good advisors. That's the issue, not the trusteeship.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think good trustees use their advisors efficiently, but then that you've got the other issue, John, that if that goes into somewhere making decisions on a house view, then it's missed again. If you're getting small schemes are getting relatively inexperienced trustees who are really good, relatively inexperienced professional trustees, really good at ticking boxes. But for small schemes, there's a lot of boxes you're not going to tick, and you're going to take very pragmatic, good, effective decisions. So both models are going to be really hard. These are just really hard decisions you're going to have to make. But I mean, I've heard the means tested a number of times now, and there's so many people just don't even think about that, don't realise that I was telling the story. Story of this weekend to my children of family members in my when I was young who couldn't afford to go full-time working because the benefits they lost would mean that they couldn't they would actually be worse off doing a full-time week, and it means testing the benefits is the same. People think you just give them £1,000, £2,000, £3,000 out the pension benefit, and all of a sudden they've got a bank account with money in that they lose housing benefit, they lose rent relief. It's real stuff that if you're not close enough to the scheme, you miss these things. If you apply house views to a group of small schemes, you miss these things.
I mean, this is stuff that the Pensions Commission needs to be hearing and talking about, because all this bit about we should get more people saving in a pension. Well, actually, there's plenty of people that are going to not benefit by doing it in this same thing with the interaction with benefits. So the Pensions Commission could pick this one up and start to talk about it more.
Bob?
Bobby, Maggie, certainly agree with everything you've said so far, Maggie, with regard to member nominee trustees. Very, very important. I just want to give some background to going back into the past as to what happened in the past. If we go back to the late 90s, early 2000s, there were a number of individuals acting as sole trustees, winding up pension schemes and charging fees with no control on it whatsoever, because a sole trustee can decide its own fees. Frank Field got aware of that. I was approached by David Laverick, who was then the pensions ombudsman, at an East Midlands NAPF meeting where he was speaking. Is there any kind of professional body or organisation for trustees? And there wasn't. And that's how we've now got the APPT. And shortly after the APPT was set up, the AMNT was made went forward. But it means that any form of sole trusteeship, particularly where the sole trustee is providing services to the pension scheme, they have complete control over the fees and charges that are charged. And there's no governance there other than maybe the TPR maybe asking questions, which I don't think they really do. I don't think anybody actually checks up. And particularly where you've got a sponsor that wants to get rid of the pension scheme, putting in a sole trustee is a simple way of actually sort of brushing it under the carpet. So I think member nominated trustees are really, really important. And because of the schemes I've set up during the late 80s, early 90s, I always would say to a member nominated trustee, particularly maybe a union official or whatever, your job is not to act for the union, it's to act for the membership and to ask questions. If your advisors can't give you clear instructions as to what's going on and what the options are, ask, and ask. So I would agree with Maggie. Some of the points you're making, Bobby, about the need for a professional trustee are very valid. But what's more important is to be able to ask questions of your professional advisors. If you're relying on your scheme actuary, your lawyer, your consultant, your administrator, just ask questions. If you're not satisfied, keep asking. So I think going back to sole trusteeship and co-trusteeship, it's far better to have a co-trustee in place with existing members. As William McGrath was saying earlier, there's a lot of history in pension schemes. They can get lost. Bobby, as you mentioned about the trustee who had some documents in his box in his garage for 30 odd years, that's all historic. And I know Rosalind will say that when she's taking on a client, she's going to go through all the deeds that have changed over the years and things. The history is so important. But it really is important that we get AMTs continuing. You don't have to be trained up to be a professional, Maggie. You just need to be able to ask the right questions, and you need to fit in with the people, and you do need a relationship with the sponsor.
Yeah,
That's my comments.
Thank you. I mean, I think the thing that fascinates me, it's water under the bridge and not something we can do anything about, but that somewhere we had the 95 Act with the structure of boards, but the ability to sort of swap it all out for a sole trustee at the employer's discretion got left in there somehow, and no control over who could be the sole trustee, because we have had some interesting examples of people appointing the company board and things like this. So it just strikes me that there's so many loopholes in this legislation we haven't dealt with, and we're trying to find ways to deal with it now round those loopholes rather than actually getting back to what it should be. But yeah, thank you. I think, yes, I'm trying to remember. Oh, it was Peter who said to me, and I heard the other day, the job of a trustee is to take advice and to challenge it.
So we've got Christos and then Peter and then Henry, and I think we'll be near the end by then.
Hi, thank you for wonderful presentations. I agree that member-nominated trustees add value. At the same time, we are in effect, conducting a live experiment, and members are the ones who ultimately we're all here to serve. I think the statistics may be a little bit off, but my understanding is that about a third of schemes haven't got professional trustees or sole trustees, about a third have got co-trustees, and about a third are sole trustees. And the TPR collects all kinds of information. So isn't there a possibility for the TPR to do the analysis and see how member outcomes and performance varies across the different types of governance models that are in existence? Because ultimately, it's the members who benefit or not. And in the spirit of VFM, perhaps the governance models themselves can be looked at, and then we can see whether having sole trusteeship delivers or doesn't, and so on and so forth.
Interesting idea, but I think given the rapid growth last few years, I think your data would be quite limited to be able to do that. But I think it's certainly something that the regulators looking to do going forward, especially if they go to registered trustees, being much more clear on who's on what. But it's certainly an interesting idea. Peter?
Thank you very much. I wholeheartedly agree with virtually everything that's been said this morning. Just one or two points I was going to pick up. One is we talked about member-nominated trustees and lay trustees, and again, I don't like that phrase. The one thing that we perhaps forget is that the company can appoint an independent trustee with knowledge appropriate to the particular environment. And it could often be the case that the company feels they are disenfranchised by a trustee board with member-nominated trustees very dominant. And this is one way of addressing that sort of psychologically in the company's point of view. Say, why don't you appoint somebody that you trust as a company selected director or trustee?
You've gone on mute, Peter.
Don't know why that happened. I don't know where I got to, but yes, I didn't actually click on it. But there we go. Yes, so I'm just commenting about the company appointing a sort of independent trustee with appropriate skills or experience relative to the particular scheme. The second thing is we've run a scheme for 20 well, I've been chair of trustees for 23 years, and my back bedroom is absolutely full of papers dating back that period. I would hate to have to go through them. But the skills, as you say, the experience, and the member nominated trustees in our scheme have been in post for longer than I have. In fact, they've been one of them has been in post since the scheme was founded. So they have a tremendous skill and bring that. And the final thing I was going to mention is we're talking often now about end games for pension schemes. Trustees have a particularly important role in that, and I would say that is the most important fiduciary duty of a trustee. Is to consider who they are, how they should approach that end game thinking. One of the interesting things that's come out of my own scheme experience is because we're a fully open scheme, the fiduciary duty is owed to not just the past service members, but also the current employees who are members of the scheme, and also the future employees who could become members of the scheme. And this means that we then bring into the scope of the fiduciary duty to the employer. How are we using this pool of resources that we have for the benefit of those members and the employer, and its ability to employ and retain those members, and its business case on that, and therefore the use of surplus to fund pension contributions, most sensibly in DB, but potentially in other vehicles, hopefully CDC, is a totally different use of the resource than if the employer is going to distribute that surplus out by dividend, or we're still by a share buyback.
Thanks, Peter. Oh, back to you then, Henry. I know we've run over slightly.
Well, there were a couple of questions which came in from Andrew Young, both related to consolidation. One, I think, was a super fund question, and another was about buyout relative to run-on. Obviously, it's 10:33, so 11:33, so we haven't got time to answer them now. But I leave them as the agenda items for a future meeting, and thank Maggie and Bobby very much for what has been a super hour in your company. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I don't know if it's Steve who's going to wind up or me.
Yeah, no, Henry, you're doing a great job. There's lots of virtual clapping. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Rosalind, for virtual clapping. Thanks to Maggie and Bobby. Really, really good session. We'll post a video up by lunchtime today. Sure, if anybody would like to see the slides, Maggie, I don't know whether you're happy for people to request slides. So if anybody wants the slides from the AMNT, then please contact Henry or myself. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed the session. Yeah, great session, Maggie. Thank you, and thank you, Bobby. And so,
and as ever, the video will be up on Pension Playpen and
we
also
promise.
on my blog, plus the slides. Okay.
We think so. Yep. Excellent.
Good.
Thanks, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day. Let's pray for peace in the East. Enjoy the rest of your day, and thanks for your attendance and for your questions and your input. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks very much. Take care. Bye.
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 Bye all.
Bye.